Hi, Griselda. How are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, Georgia. Lovely to see you. Virtually,
Lovely to see you as well. So just for everyone here who's watching, my name's Georgia and I'm Public Programmes and Residencies Producer at the Tetley. I'll also be embarking on a very exciting new project with Griselda Pollock, who is here today to talk about Panic, our artist network in crisis. So Griselda, can I ask you a bit more about this network? What would it entail, and why are you supporting this now?
Okay, well, the most important thing that we are facing now is not only a kind of world crisis, world collapse of economies and all the other kind of aspects and the dangers to health and safety that are leading us all to being different kinds of lockdowns, but of course it's creating incredible damage to the cultural world and to the very crucial fact that so many artists, so many performers, all of that aspect of our cultural life are the most precarious at the moment because so many of the sources of their survival and income has completely dried up. So when I got the Holberg Prize in June, in March 2020, we are just about to enter into it. And I was thinking of what was I going to do with this extraordinary award that was given to me to spend in the furtherance of the kinds of things that I had done in my life. And I immediately thought that there are so many students graduating this year who are facing the dire difficulties of not only there being very little going on in the art world in a certain sense, but also the kind of infrastructure of casual employment, which is the kind of mainstay for artists. And even if they do manage to get some jobs, there will be so little money for them to create. So I thought we have to do something, and because I've lived in Leeds for all this time since 1977, it's the city I've lived in the longest in my rather kind of migratory life. I feel very attached to that, and I feel very attached to the students that I've known who have stayed in Leeds, and I feel very strongly about the sense that cities need to keep artists in the city. We need to have not just national cultures or London-based cultures in New York or Berlin, but the exciting artists in our own cities servicing and creating for the particular arena. So I felt we needed to set up something for the city. So initially we had this thing about promoting an artist network in the city. And then we realized, of course, that it is an artist network in a crisis for the city, for the world, but particularly for artists. So anybody who's a great lover of Dad's Army will know, don't panic, is one of the kind of great phrases, the catchphrases of it. But I thought, in a sense, we do need to panic. We seriously need to panic because there will be so many artists who have no means of making art. But at the same time, this is such an extraordinary time in history. It would be so interesting to know what artists, young artists, and what we've called emerging artists, because people emerge as artists at every age group. People start doing it at 50s or 60s, or some people have been kind of working quite privately and then decide to go kind of much more public at different ages. So it's open to a whole range of artists of all ages, but we do need to have some artistic reflection on the new kinds of sociality, the new kinds of kind of mental experiences, mental health experiences, the new kind of issues around difference, diversity, deprivation that are shaping our world now. So when we went into the lockdown, I looked up the Spanish flu. I looked up different periods when had artists responded to a crisis? Do we have a record of how they reflected on its implications? We have Virginia Woolf registers the Spanish flu. In fact, T.S. Eliot actually had it, and many people died from it who are no longer with us as a result of that. So there are all these reasons came together that we need to support artists in this city, in this crisis. And I have the resources to give and work with the Tetley, which I was a founding donor to the Tetley as an artist-led organization. And I thought this has got to be an artist-led network in the city to facilitate the distribution of means of support and kind of commissioning new kinds of work from artists about our present.
Wow, absolutely. Well, there's so much to unpack here. So firstly, I've had many conversations with artists within the past few months and studio visits, and there is a resounding call for the need for this more financial support for practices, just because at the moment artists tend to be kind of falling in the gap. They're not benefiting as much from the furlough scheme because of straddling 0-hour contracts, temporary contracts, PAYE, income from practice, and it doesn't make up the percentages. So that's really exciting to be able to have that contribution. In terms of,
can I just underline that, because I think people don't fully understand the sort of the kind of precarity that is being inflicted, particularly on young and emerging artists who don't have any of those formal mechanisms by which the public support, or the kind of government support reach you. Right. And I think, I've been thinking about the gig economy for so long, and, how we are depending on that to keep artists going, and not socially and culturally taking our responsibilities to sustain our young artists. We educate them to live in the world, to make art on our behalf, to reflect on the world on our behalf, to enrich our lives, to explore issues that we need to think about. And yet we are providing absolutely no support. Now, this is what I'm offering is so tiny that I'm hoping that by setting it up and making it visible, other people will contribute, because it's a huge undertaking, and I've not got the massive resources to do the whole thing, but I want to set it in motion and draw people's attention to the fact this has to be done. So thank you very much for underlining that real economic desperation.
I mean, the sustainability of the network is so important, and especially because with artist networks, as part of committees in the city for their studio groups, collectives, etc., that's not paid work. So it's about sustaining a local economy, unpaid work, but also adding so much cultural and artistic contribution. And one thing I wanted to touch on is the sustainability of it, because with this flurry of emergency funding for artists, we are seeing it start to dry up, tail off, and it's about providing that sustainability through a network. And actually paying artists to be on that steering committee, which is unusual for artist-led initiatives in the region, I guess.
I think this was a very important point, that every part of the labour that's involved in initiating it, because so let me just be clear that funding is coming forward, and then we're soliciting artists to be the conveners of the network, so they will be paid for their work as conveners. There will be artist advisors who will also be paid for the time that they contribute, in order to make sure that this has absolute legitimacy, that we're not continuing to export sort of affective labor. This is a crucial thing, that so many artist-led initiatives, even when they do have funding, depend on the huge amounts of sort of what we call affective labor, extra unpaid work to keep it going. So I hope that my initiative will draw attention to the need, and people can make small contributions to this to build, sustainability, and to make sure that this is something that comes to be part of what we are going to have to do for the next 2 or 3 years at least, if not longer.
Absolutely. So in terms of that links on really well to how this will happen, and the internal processes in which this network will convene, and the advisors as well that we'll be working with. So this is really sympathetic to the existing artist-led work happening in Leeds City region, because it needs to add value to that existing work. This network isn't parachuting in. It's really working in a sympathetic way. It's working with existing networks, independent artists and practitioners and curators to develop this support system. So it's really about an asset-based framework. It's centered around strengths as assets, and not necessarily so much problems and needs. I guess that would support the sustainability of it, in terms of thinking about our strengths, how we mobilize to create work and commission work with the bursaries. So how will artists receive support? What are the different mechanisms throughout this? We've briefly mentioned bursaries. Griselda, if you wanted to chat more about the offer of support here.
Yeah, okay, so there are sort of two levels. One is obviously support in terms of payment for the time that the artists who choose to sort of convene this particular project will get. So that's in sense of payment. We're not paying artists, but the artists will be able to apply for a number of bursaries worth £6,000, which is, as it were, calculated on the basis that £4,000 is the usual kind of fee for kind of making a work, and then £2,000 for materials. So we've costed this in terms of established artist based practices and requirements. But then there are also going to be smaller grants that people can apply for when they need, again, because it's the question of materials and costs and often space that matter. So I just want to say something, since obviously the artist-led is an incredible part of the infrastructure of British culture. Almost no big city or even sizable city or even small, towns like Rotherham are sort of hubs for artistic activity and for artists to support each other by, forming networks, trying to get funding, getting space, and sharing with each other a kind of dynamic and a support. The Tetley is a product of Project Space Leeds, which was artist-led, founded by 3 artists from the city of Leeds. And so it has moved up into being a more kind of established institution, but it always has that at its heart. And I think I am wanting to lend support to this idea that artists leading activities are not just initiative and provisional on their way to something else. They form a particular kind of model for creation and sustenance of artistic communities in the space. So we are not trying to take over and add another one. We are just convening a group of artists from the artist-led community in Leeds to take responsibility for the distribution of the funds that I've been able to make available from the Holberg Prize. So we have a kind of structure where there are senior artists who will be advisors to support the group that emerges to run the network or to distribute the funding. And the Tetley will provide the space and support for their meetings and for the administration of the distribution, and also create a platform for the work, right? So we are collaborating with the Tetley as originally an artist-led project, as it's come to be a more kind of sustained one. We are reaching out to the existing artist-led community, and some of them will come together in collaboration with us to run this. Initially, it's running for 12 months. We will try to find a way to take it further, to keep attracting more, on the basis that people could give us, £500 or £1,000, or somebody could give us a huge amount of money so to make sure that there are more bursaries and more activities that we can do to sustain it. But out of this will come an extraordinary body of work, and some tiny, it's a drop in the ocean of what is needed, but at least it's a visible beacon of the fact we can begin to do something like this. So that's the structure of a kind of a support network, an advisory group, a steering committee, but the real heart of it is the coming together of artists to support each other and the possibilities we have for further fundraising beyond the money that is coming from the prize towards commissioning work, or creating these bursaries and these support.
Perfect. And also kind of linked in with this is, the institutional connection, which you've discussed, and how important it is to kind of bridge that gap between artist and institution and visibly show a support for and advocate for emerging artists, which is something the Tetley has been involved with since its inception. So it's online. If you go to our website, we have released our panic, our call for the steering committee, Committee, which you can see here. So you're welcome to read more about the network online, and there will be rolling opportunities throughout the year for these bursaries. So, if you apply for the steering committee and you would like to be involved in the network, then please do, state this in your application, because it's not just the steering committee, it's the wider group of artists. So the network almost acts as a conduit through which we can create new works, think about how we present works in this digital age, and how we can support artists.
Yeah, and I'd like to add, in addition to what you've got there, and since this is not, I mean, I was awarded the Holberg Prize, so I can do what I like with money, but it has to foster my research. And there are two things I need to say about that. One is obviously my main concerns are the inclusiveness, the diversity of contemporary art and historical art. So issues raised by feminism, by the post-colonial critique, by the Black Lives Matter, by issues about security and safety, issues of ability and physical health and well-being, all of these topics. So it's not just you can come and make any kind of artwork. There is a sense that this is encouraging art to be engaged with the situation we're in through art, but also with those things are being part of the situation we're in, because we know the pandemic impacts in terms of class, it impacts in terms of sexuality, in terms of diversity, in all these different ways. It impacts enormously on artists with different kinds of the issues of ability, able-bodiedness and disability and all these others. So we want artists to come forward who are particularly attuned to the kind of world we live in and the kind of injuries that people suffer from indifference or discrimination or lack of recognition of these elements. So that's why it's coming as part of the funding I now have from the Holberg Prize in relation to fostering research. Now you'd think, well, research would be academic research, but I think art is a form of research. And we have now, PhDs in fine art, and artists, are themselves always investigating. But what they do is they give a kind of a combination of a kind of a form. There's something that is brought into the world that wasn't there before as a way for us to think these questions, but they're also kind of investigating what these questions are, but not at an academic or a sociological or a philosophical level so much as at the level where those things impact on people who live their lives, right? And artists speak in the first person. They tell us something from lived experience. So what I'm trying to encourage here is a kind of what we could call a critically engaged artistic practice with, and this will be a way to find out. So out of this will come a research about what is happening in this extraordinary period that may last another year, may last several other years, may come again, right? But we've lived through something which needs to be brought into the world in the ways that creative art reimagine it, reformulate it, negotiate it, explore it in this way. So I think it's not just a sort of, I'm handing out money to, artists because they are in desperate straits. I'm inviting them to participate in what I think is a historic investigation into what this does mean for us, which artists are trained to kind of find forms and mediums and processes for, which will reflect it back to us, discover aspects of it that we don't know about, speak their truths from their point of view about what it's been like. And I think this will be an extraordinary archive, which we need to take further, not just because artists are good for us or artists add value, but that's why we know about the world, right? In all the history that I teach
Absolutely.
my students, whether I'm teaching them about Michelangelo or, or Titian or Manet, etc., it's through this we learn to understand what the world is as we live it, and it's a depth that you get from that. So art is a form of research, and this is my form of researching into the present in the company of artists whose work this enables us to foster, but it needs to be taken up as a project that also other people could join in with us, because it'll be such a rich archive of the experience, particularly by young people, but particularly by, I imagine this is going to, I hope we're going to ensure that it's as diverse and inclusive of all the points of view that need to be taken into account.
Absolutely. And these issues are even more urgent. And I would say that, you know, artists really generously question and interrogate and challenge the terms of engagement between practice, our contexts, audiences. And I think it's more about creating really equitable and transparent processes internally through how we're working through Panic and at the Tetley, but also, you know, how we communicate and really demonstrate and have our thinking public with this network. So that's really fantastic.
Yeah. So
Griselda, is there anything else you wanted to?
I would say also,
Yeah.
so that's the
Sorry,
point, which is that obviously one of the features of the world we're living in is exactly the format in which we are talking to each other is via various kinds of platforms and various kinds of digitality, which has been taken over in certain ways. And I think the idea that artists, for instance, many of the final year students of this last summer, 2020, suddenly had to make art for digital forms or put it on a digital platform. It wasn't, you couldn't, you know, obviously people still want to make things, but one of the elements of this is that that will be the format. And yet that is also one of the new mechanisms by which we are dealing with ourselves. And people talk about this thing, you know, we're Zooming or, you know, doing these very kind of, you know, platforms that we're using. What does this mean to us to live a world virtually? Right? I mean, I was just doing a lecture this morning for various students about touch, you know, about various paintings where, you know, people touch each other, or a child reaches out and touches a carer's face, you know, and we are deprived of touch in a certain way. We're deprived of space. I saw a film yesterday which involved kind of, you know, setting the scene of New York on 9 o'clock in the morning, you know, and you thought, I never, you know, just crowds. And I immediately went, oh my God, you know, so all sorts of things are really happening physically to us, which I think we're living, and yet the format in which we can talk about it or make art about has got to be that. So that's one of the things I think we want to explore in the Tetley, what creatively we do with these platforms, because that will be, in a sense, the legacy of the present, you know, in terms of art. So it's causing a great challenge to artists who make things, or physical things, or material things, to suddenly go into the digital as a kind of norm. And I think at the same time investigating it, I think will be so interesting. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what kind of proposals come to us from artists thinking this through. So, in a sense, if I can just say that the balance of it, but doing something to support some artists, but to create a network which was also going to include other people whom I will invite to give advice, to mentor, to support, crucially, because it's a very lonely and desolating kind of experience to be the sort of you know, isolated artists in a situation like we are. But at the same time, we're doing that kind of expansion thing. But also, I think this is going to be so important artistically, in terms of what slightly sort of nudging people in certain directions, asking them from the point of view of, you know, my feminist, post-colonial, queer, international social histories of art and contemporary art. I want people to engage deeply and to produce something that will be of lasting significance from a group of artists who are really actually on the cutting edge of this particular crisis in this particular city. So presenting, promoting, publicizing an artist network in the crisis and in the city, that's what Panic, it's calling for people. Panic, you need to do something to support art now.
Wow, what a call to action. So yeah, I mean, just look at our website. Thank you so much, Griselda, for that. That was really insightful and really useful for artists who may be thinking about applying for the steering group and the network bursaries. So yeah, that was very, very useful. Thanks, Griselda. And we'll have more information on the website, so please check it out. And yeah.
We're trying to move it along as fast as we can. So thank you, Georgia, and thank you for your support, because I'm very glad that we're able to have you as one of the people with so much experience in bringing artists together and find out what's happening on the ground. So I think you're going to be an incredibly crucial part of the team that we've also been able to make possible, that you can be a central part of it as the contact point through the Tetley. So I'm thrilled to be working with you.
Thank you. It's a collaborative effort, 100%. So, and yeah, absolutely. And your support is invaluable. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. So, thank you. Okay.
Okay.